Thank you, Sun Young. That was fabulous, concise, and I'm going to be a mess. Just because I had way too many books up here to figure out what I want to read. I did think about the fact that we've read together a lot recently, and I didn't want to read the same things. So I thought, Sun Young likes myth. I will read some mythic poems. But it wasn't just Sun Young I thought about the rest of you too. So I kind of got a bunch of myths and one poem about workshopping, sort of, for those of you who are writing. You know the old saw, kill your darlings, where you're supposed to, get rid of the things you love too much. I thought about that one day and I thought, what a terrible thing to tell people. So this is a short poem. Killed darling, raw fur and teeth, a teratoma of a beast, breast kept and unkempt, baptized before born, then sent to be reborn. It gets a better form this time. Rabbit blind and bottle fed, not much hope it will grow, and yet it blinks open, eyes all brown and wild. Don't kill your darlings. This is a little personal myth from Little Big Bully. There's a lot of pieces that were nonfiction, short essays, lyric essays that I ended up transforming and put them in Little Big Bully. And there are a lot that were not true, but I've often made these little personal myths in my work in much the way that Sun Young has converted myths into her personal language. So there's a series of them and they look like crows. And then they have this little thing down here, which I was calling the medal. Like it gets a little medal at the end. I don't know why. So this one is bearancestry.com. There is no bearancestry.com. Do not mistake me for an Ojibwe teller of tradition, teller of the living lit of long dead tellers, but do count me as a teller of still alive stories. It is true that humans become bears, mostly harmless. Once they honeyed love upon us, broke the hive and plundered. Once they hugged like bears and were bears, literal bears, with shitty tails, reeking, lumbering, gutting garbage cans. Then slumber came, which figuratively means the weaker ones fell for love. Dumb move, and done before. Weaker ones and many fell off Earth, out of orbit, lost as Bowie's midnight blue whales. Bears care most for their hungers, which means we get in the way. Collateral damage of beastly rampage, which now makes me think that these alive stories do not speak of bears, but something human and more beastly, political and public. We started with love, foolish love, which should have worried us. Love is how any beast would read our weakness. When the beast reads us, we can feel a psychic scan bright on our skin. And that smell, that one, the smell where you lips numb, the smell, taste. Not a real myth. Neither is this one. This myth, I like to tell people who are working on their writing, the answer to that question nobody wants to be asked, where do your poems come from? But I sometimes like to give you the context. This was listening to a young woman I barely knew talk about custody problems. And I thought, custody, child custody, what concept, where did that come from? And suddenly I thought, Demeter or Demeter. I was like, darn, why did she make this first custody myth? And I, the poem is to you, it's to both Demeter and Persephone. Dear Demeter, dear Earth, where Hades is the non-custodial parent. First, in the dark world of a crying child, he will think you ruined his offspring. He'll say, milk spoiled and mama's boy. Soon enough, he will hate you and hold hostage all the love he can wring from a small, terrified being. Then, when the shining child smiles and the damned underworld is seen, dank and relentless for what it is, he will see that you invented fire. He will see you kindled with your own body, an illuminated being, soul devoted, a bright likeness of the Father. He will love you. He will bless you. He will try to make you his. Oh, I was a little mad at Demeter that day. This book I talked about this morning a little bit. It's called Little Big Bully, and it's kind of about how do we understand a world that's turned suddenly to the bully, or not suddenly, it's just revealed itself as being composed of the same bullshit bullying that we all endured in junior high. So most of the time it's kind of deeply metaphoric, but this one's pretty obvious. Perpetual communion of junior high. Oh, and you can see it looks a little bit like a person, kind of squat person, a little bit of a concrete poem. She used a brittle gloss of sugar as emblem of her girlhood game, the kind of translucent candies, watermelon green, apple, cinnamon hot. Eyes closed, you'd heard the crinkle and unwrap as you stood, tongue out. If you were in, it went in. If you were out, you spit out the twist of cellophane or swallowed at the jock priestess of junior high's command. Or maybe you carried your own candies, showed her your tongue stained pink or green or red, stuck it out hard and passed. True, her goons kicked you in the ass, but to this day, any artificial taste takes you back. There was a time you stood apart from all of that. And a lot of the book is about how we don't stand apart, and kind of goes into treaty language and the sort of coercion of that. But then it comes in for the middle section back to nonfiction and some of the difficulty of nonfiction. There's a poem in here called Nonfiction Craft Lesson in March, in which I think about how do you write nonfiction if people are alive? You know, can we only write about the dead? So I'll just leave a little bit of it and read a little bit of it. We do not speak of them, so they do not answer. We do not speak those names in order that they not answer. We no longer want to hear their voices. And though they sometimes mutter, it matters that they are not bid to speak. Maple sap runs clear through the hardwood heart of maple. It's almost red. Maple darkens as it distills, boils down, condenses and sugars. A leaf of cedar mines the boil. Make whatever metaphor you will. I am simply reminded of maple when I think of the dead. And then this is a 3-part poem, but they're very quick. And it was just playing along with a game that there were some fun times on Twitter. It was a good bar. The coldness was coldness. 1, this is just to say, I've eaten the plums, etc., icebox, etc. With the exception that the plums were not plums and the sweetness was not sweetness, and that I did not eat them, but instead carried them next door to tempt the sad woman I sometimes saw smoking on the flagstones. 2, William Carlos Williams was a doctor and husband of Dr. Mrs. William Carlos Williams, who had remained nameless to me, faceless to me, except for a frown and dark brows on a pale forehead. What I've learned about Williams is that she could swim and had been an Atlantic certified lifeguard, considered herself one of the early gourmets in the US, and was often a guest of Mrs. Julia Child. Dr. and Mrs. Williams suffered from what we might now call depression, what we might now call ennui, what we might now call boredom, what we might now call god-awful stultification, etc., etc. I say this, but it is just to say a fiction. 3, this is not to say I wouldn't have eaten the plums, etc., etc., but no matter how cold or sweet, etc., etc., I would not have eaten them alone. So that's I don't think I've read those. Hope I picked the ones that I haven't read in front of you. I'm going to read one poem out of National Monuments, which also has beautiful artwork by Andrea Carlson, Minnesota painter from Grand Portage. I read one poem from here that I picked out. Talking to Sean. Thank you so much for all of this, Sean. This has been really wonderful. It's such a beautiful view. Although, again, I had a trauma. I will tell you about it in a minute. The theft outright after frost. We were the lands before we were, or the land was ours before you were a land, or this land is our land, it was not your land. We were the land before we were people, loamy roamers rising, so the stories go, or formed of clay, spit into with breath reeking soul. What's America but the legend of rock and roll? Red rocks, blood clots, bearing boys, blood, sand, swimming being from women's hands. We originate originally, spontaneous as hemorrhage. Unpossessing of what we still are possessed by what we now no more possess. We were the land before we were people, dreamy sunbeams where the sun don't shine, so the stories go, or pulled up a hole, clawing past ants and roots. Today in documentaries, scoff DNA evidence off. They landed late, but anyone knows canyons spoke them home. Nomadic Turkish horse tribes, they don't know. What is America but the legend of stop and go? Could be cousins left on the land bridge, contrary to popular belief that was a two-way toll. In any case, we'd claim them, give them some place to stay. Such as it is, we gave most things outright. The deed of the theft was many deeds and leases and claim stakes and tenure disputes and moved plat markers still stolen today. We were the land before we were people, earth divers or darling mud puppies, so the stories go, or emerging fully forming from flesh of earth. The land, not the least vaguely, realizing in all four directions, still storied, art-filled, fully enhanced, such as she is, such as she wills herself to become. So that was just a little rip-off of Robert Frost, The Gift Outright, The Theft Outright. And I had to write an essay about my most known or anthologized poem. So that was the one that, and it was in a best poems in from like Cambridge University Press or something. And I was so excited. And then I went and they'd only did the first page of the poem. Such a bummer, man. This copy is for sale over there. It wasn't my personal copy, but I read from it. So it's full of, you know. So purchase this one. I'll put this on there so you know which one. All right. Sun Young said she'd show me my 5-minute mark. Oh no. Okay, I'll just squeak this one in while I'm good, okay. I'm just gonna read one from Curator of Ephemera because I didn't print out the poems I was talking about today that are gonna be in the next book, the chapbook from Tinderbox called Verb Animate. But I do have a poem that was a commission for Ananya Dance Theater. Oh no, this is not that poem. This was a commission, but I can't remember what for. It was about St. Paul, and I read the White Pine Treaty and a lot of things about the White Pine Treaty and found out that when people were removed from St. Paul, when they split up, and Diane probably knows this, the Dakota and the Ojibwe who had been living close to each other, in parts of St. Paul, and they made the Ojibwe move north from St. Paul. They had to leave their gardens for the Dakota to tend. They took their seeds, but they had to leave their gardens, and there was Minoman down there along the islands, and they had to leave their rice beds too. So stars, seeds, signs, hours. Ashkabagazibing, St. Paul, St. Peter, 1837. We return here ever, deep and still with icy stars, sky above our new home, the same sky as over our old lands north of the river. We move and they move, long knives behind, Dakota before. We leave the good seed, Manuman, the food that grows on water. Here above the big river, our leaders dream a place we can be safe. But visions come of a time to come, our children making signs on white pine. Flatmouth will mark an elder brother, young bisons will mark, and other names grow strange in new language. We move and they move, long knives behind, Dakota before. We leave the good seed Manuman, the food that grows on water. Deep and still with icy stars, sky above our new home, the same sky as over the old lands north of the river. From this spot, we vision our gardens, Mandaman and Akosamine and their sisters. We left the white pines north of this river. Bare heart will mark and hole in the day, strong ground will mark, and others' names will grow strange in strange language. We move and they move, long knives behind, Dakota before. We leave the good seed, Manuman, the food that grows on water. Here above the big river, our leaders dream a place we can be safe. But visions come of a time to come, our children sign white pine treaty. Deep and still with icy stars, sky above the new home, the same sky as over our old lands north of the river. We stop here and look back, white banks and slough and clouds stacked in layers of forever. Our rice beds left, but not our seeds, not our stars, and not our right to hunt and fish and gather. We return here ever. That was in Curator of Ephemera, also Andrea Carlson. All right, do I have time? 2 more? All right, I'm gonna pick 2 new poems, that brand new. Although I wrote them, I started them in a workshop with Sun Young, a Zoom workshop. I got to be like 2021 and I thought I am rotting in place and haven't been out of this house, and how does one write? I can't remember. I will take a workshop with the amazing Sun Young. So I took a Zoom workshop and I wrote a few poems in her workshop, and you can kind of tell what the assignment was by the title, 20 items for my list poem list. Desire will not speak the heart of it or recognize its name, yet it calls. Glamour, just the mention of chiffon, scarves, and cherries in the snow. Tribe escapes most mention, but in mistaken notions. Givens, not to mention it's a given and who gave. Fat will not mention itself, but will speak richly, roundly, loudly. Tear gas will hiss, even misnamed, we cannot keep it quiet. Sphinx, not to mention rats, gall, gorge on all who say a word. Gladiolas, no one would mind if I mentioned funeral flowers. Figs, add to list. Name, X, our great-great-grandfather signed with his X. Germany, no one mentions silence, how it intends its little lesson. Fodder, the cannon, the feet on the ground, the daughters, the sons, the poor. Diet, not to mention how we can eat and who can't eat. Plantains, no mention of a memory of hot oil and the hum of coolers in Spanish. Glory, why would anyone even mention glory? Who is she, they? Gott. I've never mentioned the German God of my forefathers, never. Terror. The trick is to live through it again and again, the unmentionable. Blandishments. Oh, don't mention it. It was nothing. It remains not one thing. Withdrawal. What can I say? She left without mentioning a word. There's a word on the list that doesn't get mentioned. Yeah, maybe that one is better off on its own page. Sometimes my poems can't be read well. All right, it's the last one of those, and then I'll tell you about my trauma, and then I'll read a 1-minute poem. She let us read for 13 whole minutes. And I was like, what a luxury. Let's just write for 13 minutes. She turned off the Zoom and we all wrote. 13 minutes on being what's left. Death skirted the issue, happened off stage, quick and unexpected. Most of my life, that's all I had to say. On my head state, I withheld my other losses, minor complaints, what took me, what left me. My dead were merciful. My dad just dropped dead. One morning on the radio, the news voice said the names, 2 girls my age, dead. I knew their faces, tangled hair, runny noses, even the smells they carried, but I just kept turning on the word dead, not on them. Later, their carved coffins, white as sugar, distracted me. I would not think of them alive, how they would act, the little film left running in my head. I made a mental curtain and pulled it over those glimpses. Still, they kept in motion in a race, at a slide, under a clothesline, in the yard of their small home, their brother left there alone. Their photos somehow etched into headstones, their nicknames. I tried to push it back, to keep it still. I tried, and still I kept all of that. Second death, second grade, my teacher in her mini skirts and modishness, just gone. On the radio again, the death details stated 2-car accident, 1 fatality, and then it seemed so slow, her name. Tears would not come. I banged the wall with my head. The phone rang, and so we knew to go straight to church. Then we could go to school. I told no one what movie my mind played, her last moments, her best moments. She used to put on a 45 record, One Tin Soldier. We all sang our 2nd grade hearts out. We played it at her funeral. So there it is, my namby-pamby pacifist start. Her apartment was on the walk to church. I always looked up in case she would see me. This I did not quit just because she was dead. It's not enough to have been burned, abused, abandoned. Give me a break, my own voice will say. It's all wah, 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 or the joke. Who hurt you? You've been doing this since before you knew. You must be left by the dead to really hurt. You must lose, be what's left. You must be defined by the absence that suggests. Oh, that was a bummer. Okay, I will. So today, after I told folks this morning about a little viewing a little trauma last night, somebody told me my glasses were all messed up, my hair. I saw these children out in front of the hotel in a canoe, and boom, they turned it over when they got just far enough away not to walk back with it. And they started screaming and panicking. And I was like, oh, children, don't panic. That's that will cause things to be worse. I'm on the 4th floor. I cannot get to you. And then somebody started paddling out to them very slowly. And they were screaming, and they started to say things like, we're really very much in trouble. It's like, you will be fine, but loud enough for me to hear it on the 4th floor of the hotel. We are really very much in trouble. And then somebody started walking out to them, and they were like, oh, if we get to where he is, we could walk. So they did. So, all right, this is the last thing. Just wanted to shift that's a really depressing poem, the one about all the deaths. Thanks, Sun Young. 13 minutes of thinking about death. Oh, go ahead. No? That children were fine. They were out causing havoc again moments later. This is one of those questions that you get asked, and only it was a little bit more sophisticated. You might even have been there when we were asked this question. I'm being asked about contemplative practice. My days are a morass of contemplation. The practice is in place, but it is one that I resent. My dreaminess, my zoning out, my wandering attention, these disembodied days, my mind so easily contemplates. Wait, I might not even know what practice means. Ask one of the other panelists and come back to me. Let me think about it a while. Thank you so much, everybody.